We're going to take a look at a very different topic, a set of topics, if you would. And I have to give you the history of this. Our very first topic in this section is on becoming a good person is, how do we get there? How do we get to that point? And by the way, why do we want to know that? I want to pay tribute to a very dear man. His name was Mike Horn. Mike was a physician, a pathologist, and worked as vice president of medical affairs at the same place I did for many years. We became dear friends. And as life would have it, he and I got laid off on almost exactly the same time, just a few weeks apart. As we were talking about this together, we were sitting on the back veranda of his house, and he's had a lovely place by a lake and all such stuff. Really, really just serene. Mike and I had talked about all the trainings we'd done to that point, and he said, I really would like to have a good life. That sounds amazing. And getting able to handle problems and being at peace, that's an incredible set of skills. But he said, I got like one life as far as I know. I would like life to be incredible. I'd like for it to be exceptional. And I said, well, Mike, that's just absolutely awful. I don't have a clue how to do that. I wouldn't have any idea at all. How do you have this extraordinary life? How do you become an extraordinary person? What is an extraordinary person? We don't even know. I don't know any research on that. Well, that didn't slow us down a whole lot. We decided, in fact, to go talk to people. We did a face-to-face survey, mostly with people we'd never met before. We had the most unbelievable discussions. We would sit down with folks and talk about who in history do you know that's extraordinary? We'd ask folks that question after we set the groundwork for it. And oh my gosh, they took off. We had these great discussions. And we heard the same names over and over and over when we said who in history is extraordinary. We heard Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Abe Lincoln, Christ, over and over and over. Now, we begin to look at that and say, what is the common characteristic of all these people? Is it money? Well, no. Good Lord, no. We start talking Gandhi, rumor is that he had like $1 when he died, and that would have been fine by him because he was trying to want almost nothing. He did not want to have a lot of money in the bank. He tried not to. Okay, let's look at Reverend Martin Luther King. Black Southern Baptist minister. That's not a profession you go in to become rich. So wealth was not his primary concern, for sure. Let's take a look at Abe Lincoln. Actually, he did have quite a bit of money at the end of life. But for the vast majority of his years, he was poor. And then he got into the itinerant legal business, which somehow this guy was able to do it, become a lawyer without really any formal education of any consequence, and became extremely well known, and gradually, after failing multiple times in elections, moved into quite an extraordinary position. I'm going to qualify something. I said he did that gradually. He did that really relatively suddenly. He became a state legislator, and then he moved into the presidency. But money was not what drove him, clearly. Mother Teresa took a vow of poverty. She didn't want money. And I've had any number of discussions with people about Christ. I said, can you tell me, did he use the 60-40 split in terms of his investment strategy? Was he looking for particular ratios or something as he decided whether to buy stocks or bonds? What was it about Christ that he used to handle his money? I've talked to many religious leaders on this. There's no mention of his money in the Bible. It's not money. The one characteristic to all these people is these are really, truly good people. They get what being good means. So what can science tell us about this process of becoming good? Now that I can sink my teeth in. That I have some knowledge of. I don't know anything on how to become an exceptional person, but becoming a good person, wow, there's some good stuff out there. we're going to touch on three things. First thing we're going to be looking at is, in fact, moral reasoning, the various stages we go through to become increasingly moral in our lives. We don't see morality or goodness in the same way. And step one, number one reason we don't do that is moral reasoning. Number two reason is we're at different stages in development of our faith. And number three, we emphasize strengths of character differently from person to person. In the realm of moral reasoning, there was an absolutely incredible fellow named Lawrence Kohlberg. He studied the various stages we go through as we become increasingly moral beings. He said there's 4 levels, and under those 4 levels are 7 stages. Level 0, which means there's really no moral reasoning at all going on, is when we're just egocentric little poots. When we come into the world, it's all about me. You pay attention to me. What I need, you better provide. I've never known a little one who woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and had some kind of problem. They're hungry. They got a diaper moment or something like that. And they said, well, I'll just wait till mom and dad get up in the morning. I'm okay. I'll just wait. They don't do that. They yell. My little guy, who's now 45, when he was a little fellow, about 6 o'clock in the morning, he woke up and boy, he let us know he was awake. He didn't want anything. He just wanted company. Didn't have anything he needed per se. He just needed mom and dad. So he went to see him 6 o'clock every morning. It was really challenging for 2 years before he slept the entire night through. Having said that, and even then he didn't sleep much past 6 o'clock for a long time. Step one, what is good is what I like. If I don't like it, it's bad. That's it. That's all I need to know. There's no notion of rules or anything like that, no concept of rules. But, next up is level 1 of moral reasoning. Kohlberg called this pre-conventional morality. He said there's 2 stages. When we first move into understanding morality at all, beyond, hey, take care of me, we start looking at punishment. If we do something, we can have consequences we don't like. At this point in life, good is determined by the consequences of our behavior, and only we're looking at the punishment side of it, and boy, do we try to avoid that. We also get it that there are people who can control this punishment thing, and they're kind of powerful. We will comply with what they want. There's no notion of rules. I mean, not my rules. There's those people's rules. Stage 2, we move into a realm of being kind of hedonist little poots. We discover not only about that punishment thing, but we discover pleasure. There are things we can do that, wow, we kind of like that stuff. What is bad involves things we don't like. It's punishing. What is good is stuff we do like. It's pleasurable. We become hedonistic. At this stage, people are seen as tools, as ways to get things for me. How useful is that person is how we judge that person's worth to us. Moreover, if an individual messes this up for us, then there needs to be some type of vengeance. It's like a moral thing. You have to do it. Now, get this. Kohlberg said that we, in fact, stop at some stage of our moral reasoning development. Very, very few of us go all the way to the top. People who stop at this stage are quite narcissistic. We're seeing an increase in narcissism in our country. There's research suggesting that's going on. This is a real serious issue. Look at the level of moral reasoning. There was a fellow by the name of Bernie Madoff, not that many years ago. Bernie was powerhouse on Wall Street. Oh my gosh, he was incredible. Just an amazing man. He had all this money pouring into his organization, and he talked about how money came on one floor and then the reports are kicked out on the floor right below it. And he always got such incredible returns. He had tremendous amount of money, something like $50 billion that he had control of. Now here's the bad news. As much as we thought Bernie was amazing, Bernie was quite a crook. Eventually he got caught. And we discovered that all that money that was coming in, he took it. He and the people that worked for him took the money. The reports that were being cranked out one floor down were bogus. They didn't have anything to do with anything. They were just made up numbers. Take in money on one floor, crank out bogus reports on the other floor. That's what they did. And $50 billion from people. Some pretty famous people got stuck in that one. Of course, he got arrested, ended up in prison. One boy died of health reasons. One boy committed suicide. His wife didn't want anything to do with him. Prisoners with him said that Bernie liked it when he was on TV and they were talking about how much he ripped people off. And they said, Bernie, you must have made off with millions of dollars. And he smiled and said, billions. Was kind of proud of it. And he was okay until they wanted their money back. And he said, that's my money. That's narcissistic thinking. It was never his money. He stole it. Also going to tell you, gangs tend to operate at this level of moral reasoning. Very, very basic. When you find somebody at this level of moral reasoning, not uncommon, they'll end up in prison or, and this is concerning, they can get pretty high in organizations. They can move pretty high up in terms of the ranks of organizations. And when you get an individual who's narcissistic in an organization, you got a problem. Level 2. Kohlberg referred to this as conventional morality, meaning this is where most of us are. We start hitting this level sometime in our teenage years, and most of us stay here. Stage 3, he called it the good boy, good girl orientation. At that level, we're looking to what mom and dad want. If mom and dad are proud of what we're doing and they like it, that's good. If mom and dad don't like it, they're not proud of it, they're kind of disappointed in us. Oh my goodness. I remember that time in my life. If my dad said he was disappointed in something I did, I was devastated. I never wanted my dad to be disappointed in me. Goodness, no. And then there was a transformation at some point in my teenage years. It moved away from mom and dad to my buddies. And we did things that, frankly, mom and dad would not have been proud of. But my friends liked it, my peer group, and we took on the rules of my peers, and that was good. We started looking at what did they expect of our parents, of our peers, and if it pleases our peers, if it's what they want, we will conform. That's what this level of moral reasoning is about. At this level, we start looking at the intentions of the behavior. What do they mean to do by that behavior? We also look at morality as everybody's doing it. Now, remember I said people get stuck at these levels? After the 2008 utter fiasco financially, which didn't really need to happen, it was driven by some absolutely awful banking practices. I've read, I'm not an expert in that field, but I've read that to be true. There was an investment banker interviewed on television, and he was one of the main players. He hurt a lot of people. When they asked, how do you feel about this? Do you feel bad about having done this damage to so many people? He said, well, if I didn't do it, somebody else would have. We're talking, he has the moral reasoning of a teenager. And he's a major investment banker. He hurt a lot of people. He didn't see he did anything wrong. Stage 4, we start talking about maintaining the social order. And this is where most people stop. The rules of society, the laws, the rules, the regulations, the guidelines, that becomes the authority, and we comply. We don't question it. We just do it. If you do the crime, you do the time. You got to pay your debt to society. That's the mentality of this stage. These are the law and order people. Now, I grew up in the 1960s, as a teenager, that is. I maybe still be growing up, who knows? But when I was a teenager in the 60s, oh my, we had horrible things going on. There were riots, there were terrible violence. The news was not good. Vietnam was going on, and we had this civil rights thing going on. Well, I happened to live in some parts of the South at that point in time, and I got to tell you, I had any number of people say, we shouldn't be doing this stuff with changing civil rights. That's going to disturb the social order. There's a way things work. There's rules, there's guidelines. We need to make changes. They talked about the social order. Reverend Martin Luther King said, if we're doing something that's morally wrong, at what point in time is it right to delay fixing it? The social order people said, put it off or go slow. He said, fix it right now. Now, move to level 3. This is post-conventional, according to Kohlberg, or what he referred to as the principled level. This doesn't happen a whole lot. This is a minority of people, adults, that will have this level of moral reasoning, and it's usually coming with people who get a little bit older. They begin to recognize there are rules behind the rules. At stage 5, this is a social contract orientation. They do see laws and rules of society as being important and something we need to pay attention to. They do help us with fairness and such, but they're not the final word on what is good. There are things that they regard as higher level moral principles than the laws and the rules. They can say, we got this law, sure we got it, but it's wrong. To these people, good comes from application of moral universal principles. Obeying the laws is important, reasonable most of the time. But if they conflict with the universal moral principles, laws got to change. They're wrong. Let me talk about Martin Luther King. This Southern Baptist minister was approached by the NAACP, and they said, Martin, we've got a problem. We have this body of law called Jim Crow laws. They were called Jim Crow because there was this skit at that point in time that white guys would put on blackface and behave quite atrociously, and apparently that was seen as quite funny by an awful lot of people. These laws said black people have to sit in the back of a bus. Black people can't drink out of a white person's water fountain. They must go to the colored water fountain. If they're going to go to a movie, they have to go to the balcony. Lots of laws like that. There was a law that said that if you're 1/8 or more black and you marry a white, gone. Marriage is void. Martin Luther King said these laws are wrong. Yeah, they're the laws. Absolutely. And to the extent that they're laws of society, it would make sense we would respect them in most circumstances. But when the laws of society violate the universal principles, the laws are wrong. They got to change. He got them changed. It was really unbelievable what he went through. And he used the techniques of Gandhi. I actually had the opportunity to go to his, Martin Luther King's, gravesite and memorial. And oh my goodness, what a facility that was. I got to walk through the room that he dedicated to Gandhi. I saw the spinning wheels that Gandhi used to take wool or whatever it was and turn it to thread that he saw was so comforting and made him relax. I saw one there and I thought, oh my, this is just amazing. Two of the great people in history I got to see things about in one place. Impressive. Now, stage 6, the individual principles of conscience orientation. I'm going to guess Mother Teresa is at this level. I'm not an expert at this, but I'm pretty sure she was. They are further down the road than the Martin Luther King people. The Martin Luther King people, as I'm seeing it, understood the universal principles, and that's what they predominantly looked at. But the level of understanding of those universal principles goes up even higher with the people at this level. They are searching for, and they live with, a consistency of those universal moral principles. I had a friend who actually got to see Mother Teresa, and I think, as I say, she probably was at this level. He said, it was incredible. This little bitty lady gets up on a box behind a podium because she's pretty small, microphones everywhere, and he said the room, this quite large room, went totally silent because nobody wanted to miss a word she had to say. The way people at this level get it is not something that anybody else does. They look at things like the equality and worth of all human beings. They never see people as a means to an end. The people are the ends. Our goal is not to use that person to get that done. Our goal is to make that person have a better life. I want to stress, very few people reach this stage. And here's something really impressive. Kohlberg said that we truly can't understand people more than one stage above us. So if the vast majority of us are at late stage 4, the law and order people, and if stage 6, Mother Teresa type person comes along, they're kind of scary. We're not real comfortable with them. They're hard to understand. So let's take a look at the research. There's 2 approaches to research in situations like this. One is longitudinal, where you start studying somebody as an infant and studying for the full length of their life. That goes on forever, if you would. Full length of life. That's like the Harvard study I previously referenced. What in effect it amounts to. These are very, very long term, usually involve teams of researchers over decades and decades. Not a whole lot of longitudinal research being done for obvious reasons. More likely we will do cross-sectional, which means we'll study little guys and 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 20-year-olds, etc. The research that Kohlberg and colleagues did was somewhat longitudinal, and they did a fair amount of cross-sectional work. Seems to support what he came up with. We had this work all put together, and Mike Horn and I chatted about this and talked about where we should go with this. Along the way, I ran into Father Todd Phillipson. Father Todd's quite an amazing guy. He had a business degree, went back to school, and became a priest. And he was in my hometown at the time. Asked if my team and I could help him develop job description, performance appraisal, compensation systems, and such as that. So we did that for a church. What a fascinating process. I really got to know the gentleman. I'm impressed. We've remained friends. He said, you might want to consider Fowler. After having read this training, he said, I studied Fowler in theology programs that I went through and in the monastery, and I think it would fit. So I looked up Fowler's work and began to read it and went, oh my gosh, does this fit? Moral development is enhanced by our understanding of faith. He said, everybody has faith. Atheists have a faith. Okay? He's not talking about organized religion per se. He's talking about our understanding of how everything all fits together. What's the nature of the connections we have in life? He referred to this as our master story. When we ask the question, what's life all about? We talk about our faith. If we say, who's really in charge here? We talk about our faith. If we say, how do we live a good life, have a worthwhile life? We're talking about our faith, according to Fowler. Everyone, again, according to Fowler, says we have faith. We're at some stage of faith development. Let's take a look at his stages. The first 2 stages were, in fact, pretty straightforward. Stage 1, we see life as magical and mystical, and we're thinking about monsters and fairies and such as that. We believe in Santa Claus, if you would. Stage 2, we don't believe in Santa Claus anymore. We know it's mom and dad. We're very concrete. Stage 3 is when life starts getting interesting. He says in the realm of faith, we move into what he called synthetic conventional faith. We just conform. We accept the beliefs that other people hand to us. We don't examine them. We don't ponder them. When it comes to authority, we don't have authority, they do. Our job is not to question. Our job is not to think on our own. Our job is to do what we're told, to comply. For most, it starts into early adolescence, and for a lot of people, it stops right there. It doesn't go any further. A few go to the next stage, what he called individualistic reflective faith. This is huge. These folks have stepped back and said, what are my beliefs? I know what other people tell me what my beliefs should be, my faith should be, but what is my faith? My own. They're not defined by the group they belong to anymore. Their beliefs are their beliefs. When folks hit this stage, they start taking responsibility in a whole new way because you know what? It's now me. Not their ideas of what's right, it's my ideas. And am I complying with my own ideas of what's right in this world. How's it all fit together? Who's in charge? Stage 5, conjunctive faith. That usually doesn't happen before midlife. We start saying, it's faith, folks. It's not facts. My faith is right for me, but I understand you may see things differently. I understand you may see things differently than I do, and that's okay. I have this approach to faith. You have that approach to faith. I accept that. We begin to become quite tolerant, and we start becoming increasingly committed to the welfare of others, people who historically we would have seen, oh, they're so different from me. We're recognized at this stage of development of faith that we see them as our fellow travelers. They just have a different perspective than we do. 6 blind men and the elephant. Sound familiar? You might want to Google that particular story, 6 blind men and the elephant. There's some things that I haven't told you about it that I think you'll like it when you read that. It fits what we're talking about. People at this stage begin to look very closely at their deeper self. They look at their ideals, their prejudices, what they believe to be true about life, and wow, do they change. Stage 6. This is a universalizing faith. It's rare. They live the universal moral principles. There's some kind of special grace about these people. You get to know them. They seem simple. They seem kind of ordinary. But when they talk, there's this enormous clarity. And somehow, they're more human than the rest of us are. Let's look at some of the things Mother Teresa had to say for us. She said, if we have no peace, it's because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. She said, loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible poverty. Now, our Surgeon General, Murthy, said loneliness is roughly the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for your health. It's terrible for people. In England, the United Kingdom, there is, in fact, a minister of loneliness. They're trying to come up with a way to decrease loneliness in their country. She's right. Loneliness is terribly destructive. Mother Teresa said, we, ourselves, feel that what we're doing is just a drop in the ocean. But the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. You make a difference, people. She said, in fact, when you are engaging in the universal rules and you're following life in accordance with the highest levels of faith, the highest levels of moral reasoning, any little thing you do makes a difference. If you're in pursuit of being a better person, everything you do makes a difference. As people hit this high level, oh, they're so ready for fellowship with people from all the other stages because they've been there. They approach life so differently. They love their life, but they're also kind of indifferent to it. It's not like they're into, oh, watch out for me. They're more concerned about watching out for you. Intriguing. Their focus on other people is so intense that some actually see this as subversive to society or organized religion. Isn't that interesting? Massively good people can be seen as subversive. These, of course, are going to be people at lower levels of moral reasoning, lower levels of faith. They don't begin, and this may be why they get in trouble, they don't begin with the assumption that those institutions of society, such as church, such as government, are right. They can be wrong because they're playing folks to a different drummer. They're playing to the universal rules of goodness. Because they are somewhat disconcerting as they're alive at times, after they pass, oh my gosh, are they honored. Mother Teresa became a saint in almost no time. It was just wham, she's done. That doesn't happen a whole lot. When people pass on, who are these massively good people, at that point in time, we get it. But not until then. So what's the research tell us about Fowler's work? One more time, show me the data. I've got that orientation. As much in this whole big section we're talking about, I'd love to have massive data. It's not there. But there's some. And I think we're on the right path. I can't say this is absolutely right, and I don't mean to portray it any other way, but we're on a path that I think is very helpful. I've seen it play out with a lot of people, and it does help. Fowler did not provide longitudinal studies. He did quite a few cross-sectional studies that do show the stages of faith as predicted. He found only one person at that highest level, some fellow in his 60s. Okay, so we can't say that was real for sure, but we're getting there. We have talked about more reasoning. We have talked about faith. Both of them talk about the universal rules of goodness. Wouldn't it be nice if we knew what those were? There are 4,000 roughly known religions, almost 2,000 Protestant religions. Nothing has caused more wars than that. There's been people who have actually looked into this and said that the idea of what is the right religion is a really difficult question, and we don't handle it well so very often throughout history. Wouldn't there be value in finding a different approach? Well, Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman did not set out to do this. What they were looking at was they helped start this new field of psychology called positive psychology. They said, in the realm of psych, we have the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. They call that the Catalog of the Insanities. It lists every mental illness that's recognized at this point in time. It's impressive. They continue to come back with new evolutions. Most recently, I think I heard DSM-6. There'll be a 7 and not long, probably, the way that thing flows, and maybe an 8 and a 9, who knows. But we don't have anything on the other side. From a scientific perspective, we don't have a catalog of the sanities, as they said. We don't have a catalog of goodness. We need something. If we're going to create this new field of psychology, called positive psychology, psychology for you, we need something to shoot for. What are our targets? I have to tell you, the research these people did was absolutely stunning. As I read their book, Character, Strengths, and Virtues, it's a big book, small print, I kept saying, oh my God. And apparently I did that once too often. My wife came to me and said, oh, Elliot, would you stop saying, oh my God? You're kind of getting on my nerves. Well, after a while, she came back and she said, why don't you go back to, oh my God? She said, quit saying holy crap. She said, what are you reading? I've never heard you normally read quietly. I've never heard you erupt like this every little bit. And I told her, and she looked at me with just kind of stunned, and she said, oh my God. I said, exactly. I'm reading the universal rules. Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman, these two absolutely incredible researchers, said, what has our ancestors said is good throughout history? They came up with 10 criteria. Let me give you some examples. They said, although strengths can and do produce desirable outcomes, each strength is morally valued in its own right, even in the absence of obvious beneficial outcomes. They use as an example reverence for life. Another criteria that they used, they said the display of this strength by one person does not diminish other people in the vicinity. Now let me go on a tangent here. Another favorite researcher of mine is a fellow by the name of Jonathan Haidt. This young man is smart on a scale that's spooky. Jonathan said, if in fact we do something that is good, there's a statistically significant increase in people around us will do something good. He called that the elevation effect. My friend Randy Gard told the story of he flew a lot. He was in a corporate world, and oh my gosh, he was on airplanes all the time. As a consequence, fairly often he was seated in the first class or the business class of the airplane. Well, one time he was sitting there, and a soldier got on, and he thought about it a little bit because this guy looked like life had been hard, and asked the flight attendant. And the flight attendant approved. Randy went back to the soldier, took him out of his seat in the back of the plane, and gave him his seat up front. Randy went and sat in the back. Pretty soon, the entire group of people at the front of the plane, and those prized seats were sitting in the back, and soldiers were sitting in all the seats. That's the elevation effect. What Jonathan Haidt found is if, in fact, we want to increase the goodness of the world, start with me. I do good, it increases the probability of others do good. If that goes on long enough, oh my gosh. Now back to Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman. Let's take a look at what did they find with this incredible study. They went across time from Confucius days forward, across times, across cultures. They found 6 quite prevalent themes. They called them virtues. First, wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. These 6 themes are throughout history. Our ancestors said these are very important, obviously. And if you look at the research of Seligman and Peterson, oh my gosh, the depth of their work was unbelievable. It's just an amazing book to read, and I encourage you to read it. Character, Strengths, and Virtues by Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman. They took it to the next level, and they said these 6 things, they're going to call them virtues. We don't do a virtue directly. We do a strength of character. They found 24 strengths of character situated under each of, some of those strengths of characters were situated under each of the virtues, such that if, in fact, you engage in the character strength of kindness, that manifests the virtue of humanity. And that's the way it works. We don't do virtues directly. We do strengths of character, which compel the presence, if you would. They manifest the presence of a virtue. Are they right? And this is what blew me away. They studied these things. They compared them to known religions. They compared them to all sorts of things, and they found no contradictions. Now I ask you, in the world of theology, how often do you hear no contradictions? It just isn't said. I'm finding contradictions. This is amazing. They didn't say it exactly. And you kind of had to read between the lines because these are scientists and they're going to be very cautious. And they're very wise men. They said, in effect, these may be our first scientific look at the universal rules of goodness. Incredible? Back when we looked at happiness, and I had you go to the Values in Action website at www.viacharacter.org, and I said, look at your character strengths and identify your top 5 strengths of character, identify your signature strengths, which compels you to be happier and happier the more you do those. Those 24 strengths of character you were looking at, folks, those are the universal rules. Impressive. So let's pull it all together. What's all this tell us about it, how it impacts the ways we look at ethics and what's right? We know we're not going to all be at the same stage of moral development. We're not going to be at the same stage of faith. We're going to emphasize other strengths of character. And frankly, we don't even know what else. I think there's lots of other things could be figuring into such incredibly complex decisions as to what's right, what's morally appropriate. But we do know those 3. The challenge for each of us is to do what's right. Yet nobody knows the absolute answer to that question, what is right? Now, how do we sit down with a group of people with different stages of moral reasoning and faith and different strengths of character they're emphasizing and come to an agreement as to what is the morally appropriate thing to do? Step 1, work to develop yourself to the highest level of moral development that you can, the highest level of faith that you can. Push for more and more understanding of this notion of goodness. We've been taught to do this for 2,000 years. In the religion world, that's the theme. Now, what one group calls good, another group calls good is points of great disagreement. But the theme of all of them is to do good. So this isn't new thought. As we get more into understanding of the various levels of moral reasoning, faith, and the strengths of character and such, we're going to be better able to understand each other's perspectives. We're going to be able to see and get a notion of what that person thinks. And we're likely to become more aware of and more tuned to the universal rules of morality. We are going to get it. We are very different. When it comes to what's the right thing, we're going to have different perspectives. And we've got to be able to disagree. We've got to be able to address the differences. We've got to be good at conflict. Got to be able to forgive. And along the way, we have to accept the potential that we are wrong. We have to accept that we have the possibility of being incorrect. Years ago, I worked at a place, we hired med students to be phlebotomists. These are the folks who come into your room, and I point to my arm because they draw blood. It's not the most exciting job, but it's a wonderful job for a med student. They get to see how a hospital works. They get to learn how to use needles and such things, and they interact with patients. It's a really good early stage development for a person who's wanting to become a doctor at some point in time. So that's what we hired them to do. Unfortunately, we had one young man who was really quite smart, quite talented, and was correcting the nurses in front of the patients. One of the older nurses contacted the head of phlebotomy and said, got to tell you about this young man. This is what he's doing. Now, we've not killed him yet, but that's coming. So you better deal with this fellow. The head of phlebotomy was an amazing young lady, just really quite a young soul of insight and understanding. She brought him in, chatted with him a little bit, and told him about what he was doing. Said, here's what's happening. Here's the consequences of what's happening. The nurses are sharpening sharp instruments to do you in effect. Let me talk to you about potential fallibility. I hadn't heard that phrase before until she said it. And as I thought about it, I thought, oh man, is she onto something? She said to him, if in fact you approach a situation as though you could be wrong, separate from the patient, you ask the nurses, I'm learning. I'm thinking about this. This is the way we were going. Is it possible that this could be of value? I'm trying to grasp something here. And if you're right, they're going to think you're brilliant. And if you're wrong, you'll learn. If you say, I'm right, and you're wrong, the first time you're wrong, you'll blow your credibility. They're not going to listen to you much after that, especially if you hurt a patient and they follow what you say. You're done. You don't want to go there. Now, there's been some very famous things done in history in the world of science that when people accepted potential fallibility, wow, did we take steps forward. A fellow by the name of Watson was heading a team of researchers. Another fellow by the name of Crick had another team of researchers, and they were combating back and forth over something pretty fundamental. What's a DNA molecule look like? Intriguingly, Watson said, he sat down in a rocking chair one day and said, what if we're kind of wrong? And they're kind of right. What if we just step back and say, what's right about what they're talking about and what's right about what we're talking about, and go that way as opposed to saying we're totally right and they're totally wrong? He got potential fallibility. He thought about it and he went, oh my God, the DNA molecule must look something like a ladder. Unfortunately, ladders are quite unstable, so he knew it had to be more than that. He slept on it. And the next day, he took that ladder and gave it a twist. It's called a double helix. By sitting in his rocking chair saying, I could be wrong, and thinking about how he could be wrong, he and Crick's team, his team and Crick's team, both won the Nobel Prize for discovering the DNA molecule. It's a double helix. There's a wonderful book out there written in the 1960s. I bought that for my son not terribly long time ago because I want him to understand how science really works. It's kind of messy. But get that you could be wrong. It's so important. In the realm of moral reasoning, in the realm of faith, in the realm of coming to an understanding of what the right thing is, we could be wrong. That's what we're given in life. None of us have a complete understanding of everything, a complete knowledge of everything. We're just people. So you got to play with what you got. As such, when we start talking about moral issues, and they're everywhere, oh my goodness, when I start talking to people about moral situations that they encounter day in and day out, they hadn't thought of them as being moral, but they are. Think about it. Facilitators, here's one thing I want you to do. I want you to step back and give a lot of thought about moral issues you deal with a day in and day out basis. You go to work, you have a budget, X number of dollars to spend. Somebody's going to get this amount, somebody's going to get that amount. Who gets what? How's that going to work? Very often, that can be a moral decision, especially in places like hospitals. Oh my. Hospitals, day in and day out, are just rampant with decisions of morality. When you move into those situations, be ready for disagreement. It's normal and it's okay. You have different perspectives. And by the way, you got to hold the tail. You think it's a rope. The elephant may be much more complicated than that. You could be wrong. It is through effective resolution of these conflicts over disagreement about what constitutes right that we move forward. Important to be good at conflict. Oh, by the way, you are. You're good at grudge busting. You can get rid of the grudges that hang on afterwards even. Now, if it gets to a point that the morality of the circumstances you're in are not tolerable to you, then it's time to leave. That's time for you to leave that circumstance, whether they were part of a club, it's a job, some type of social relationship. If it's going to dictate that you engage in behavior that is morally inappropriate, it's time to go. Also want to tell you something else. I discovered this kind of, unfortunately, in healthcare. There's something called moral distress. In healthcare, the way that plays out, folks who are direct patient care, such as nurses and med techs and doctors and such as that, can reach a state where they're saying they are so unable to give the care for patients that they think is a morally appropriate level for that patient to receive. They will not just be stressed, they're going to have moral distress. When they hit that level of distress, that it becomes a moral issue, they don't just quit their job, they quit their career. I had an ICU nurse that quit and became a real estate agent. It broke my heart because she was so good. I liked her. She's still my friend for years and years. She passed on, but lovely lady. I went to her at one point in time and said, is the reason you left your job as an ICU nurse due to this moral distress stuff? She said, absolutely. She quit her job as an ICU nurse and left the career and became a real estate agent because she felt she could not give the level of care to patients that was morally appropriate. And we're seeing more of that today. It's troubling. Be ready for one more thing. Got to have moral reasoning. As high a level as you can get it. Keep moving in that direction, and the way you move forward is to deal with moral dilemmas. And build faith. Have higher and higher levels of faith. Then get to know strengths of character. Not just your signature strengths, which increase your happiness. That was kind of a nice discovery. But know all 24 of the strengths of character and the virtues. They're important to you. That's not enough. It's not enough to work to become a very good person and know the strengths of character to move in that direction. You have to understand those things are going to compel us to behave in a way that really are immoral. A fellow by the name of Philip Zimbardo, who's a social psychologist at Stanford University, did something absolutely incredible. He did a study that he called the Stanford Prison Study. Now, Philip's dad was a Bronx cop, so you could see how this fit together in his history. Any case, he advertised for and got some young men from the Stanford area. They agreed to spend 2 weeks in a fake prison in the Stanford Psych Department basement. And basically what the gentleman did was he brought them in. Some were prisoners, some were guard, randomly assigned. And wow, was he surprised what he found. After 10 days, he had to terminate the study. He had a friend come to him, a faculty member, and say, "Phil, would it be okay if I went down to see your prison study?" He said, "I would be honored." On the way there, she ran into a young man totally dressed in khaki. Now, he was one of the guards, all guards dressed in khaki. And they had no name. They were referred to as Mr. Correctional Officer in the prison. Totally anonymous. She walked into the prison. On the way there, she chatted with him and said, "What a good guy this young man is. He's got a great future." Then she walked into the prison. They opened the door, walked through that door, and she said, "I've never seen a change like that in a human being in my life. It was frightening." She said, "He became harsh. They called him John Wayne." She said, "He was tougher than John Wayne." I was really put off. Almost immediately, she beat a path to Phil Zimbardo and said, "Phil, you got to stop this. You're hurting students. You're a good professor. You don't hurt students." They got into quite an argument, and it was pretty heated, apparently. She took off, and he said, he thought about it a little bit and went, "Oh my God, she's right. I'm not the superintendent of prisons like I'm pretending to be for this fake prison that I've got going. I'm a researcher. I'm studying prisons. This got to stop right now." And he stopped it and immediately went to work with the young men who'd been in the prison to ensure there was no long-term damage, and wrote it up as this stunning study became known as the Stanford Prison Experiment. Every social psych, introduction to social psych, every introductory psych book has the Stanford Prison Study in it. It's well known. What he discovered was that when we create these environments, things can go in directions we didn't expect. I should qualify what I told you a moment ago. that lady he got into the big argument with, he married her like 3 years later, so it must have not been too bad. But any case, years go by, and then we have something quite remarkable happen. We have Abu Ghraib. During the Iraqi war, we took over the prison, one of the prisons, that is, in Iraq, entitled Abu Ghraib. In Abu Ghraib, our guards took over the Muslim prisoners that we put there. And we treated them in ways, and we did things with them that absolutely violated the Muslim faith. And we put it on the internet. And we lost the support of the Iraqi people right then. It was a terrible mistake. The things we did were way bad. The guards and et cetera were arrested. They were brought back to this country, put on trial, getting ready to go to Leavenworth for federal prison for the crimes that they committed. One of the guards who was being prosecuted hired Philip Zimbardo to come in. Well, Dr. Zimbardo pulled out all his notes from the Stanford Prison Study and reviewed them again. He went, "Oh my God, look at this." He said, "There is so much to be learned here." He went through the court proceeding. In that proceeding, he said, "I got to tell you folks, it is true a rotten apple will contaminate the whole barrel. If we bring in one person who's a real rotten character, they can do damage to the whole group. But sometimes it's the barrel." When we put together that prison, the things we did in that prison, to a large extent, replicated the Stanford Prison Experiment. And we got terrible behavior. I'm not surprised. Having said that, after all that was over, and tragically those young people went to prison, he went back to Stanford and he wrote a book called The Lucifer Effect. It's a book to read. He said there are things out there, social psychological forces, that compel us to do things that maybe aren't the best things. Sometimes they're very helpful, but sometimes they're not. Examples he gave are rules. Rules tell us what's acceptable and what's not. Unfortunately, they can develop a life of their own. And they hold authority even when they're not relevant or they're not appropriate. Rules can become inflexible, and people can do some real damage to people based on rules. Maybe warrants stepping back and saying, do you want to use that rule? Talked about roles. We can take on roles such as prisoners and guards, and we can just simply explain away our personal responsibility for any damage we did. It's called the Nuremberg defense. After World War II, many of the Nazis were brought to Nuremberg, put on trial, and their defense was, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just following orders. The court said, yeah, you did something wrong and you're responsible. Even if you were following orders, you're still accountable for what you did. Anonymity. Can't pick them out of a crowd. De-individuation is when we don't feel we're accountable anymore. When we get anonymous, we're just part of a crowd, we can behave in ways that are immoral. When we have anonymity and de-individuation, we can do things that are pretty bad. Remember, the guards wore all khaki, and they're all referred to as Mr. Correctional Officer. Be careful of such things. We can have what's called cognitive dissonance that says what we did is okay. Cognitive dissonance is where we have two ideas that really don't fit together. I'm really a nice guy, but I just did something really rotten. Well, there's good reasons I did that. We'll talk more about that after a bit. Social approval. We want to be liked. We want people to accept us, to respect us. We'll do things to conform to the group, what we think they want, that if we weren't part of that group, there's no way we'd do that. The power of authority. Oh my. Stanley Milgram studies are just very famous studies. He had two people come in. One person he asked to take a paper out of a hat or some such. It said teacher. He said, okay, you're going to be the teacher. The other person is the student. Now, what the teacher didn't realize is the other fellow was actually part of the study. He wasn't a participant in the study. He was one of the researchers. They took the student, put him in a chair, strapped him in, hooked electrodes to him, plugged it into this black box, which they had plugged into the wall. And then they set the teacher in front of this panel of switches and a microphone and a speaker. He was to read a question to the student. If the student got it right, fine. If the student got it wrong, the teacher was to progressively, from left to right, push the next button over. If he missed one, he pushed button 1. When he missed question 2, another question, the second question he missed, he pushed the one over, if you would, the second button. If he missed another one, he pushed the third button. The question was, how far to the right would they go? The further to the right, the more powerful the electrical shock that guy was going to get. They were told it would do no lasting damage, but it's going to hurt like heck. When in fact they did preliminary work on this, they talked to psychologists and psychiatrists, they said no more than 1% would go all the way to the top, because that would be incredible sadistic, and we just don't have that many pure sadists out there. Not going to happen. Stanley Milgram said you need to go all the way to the top. 66% of men and women went all the way to the top, and this has been replicated. This is a real problem. If a person in a position of authority tells us to do something, we're very likely to do it, even if we know it's wrong. 22 RNs, and I've worked my entire career with RNs. I've been married to one for 52 years. These people don't do stuff that's wrong. I won't tell you that they're all that way, but the vast majority of them are really quite incredible people. They don't do things that'll hurt a patient. They asked 22 RNs to do this one procedure, a medical procedure. They said a doctor had ordered it, gave them the name and all such stuff. Then they checked to see how many actually prepared to do it. It was nursing 101. You don't do that. If you do that, you'll hurt a patient. They knew that. Now, out of 22, pause for a moment, facilitators, and think, how many RNs do you believe were getting ready to do that procedure? 21. Only one said nope. Only one. A person in a position of an authority said you need to do this, knowing full well it was going to hurt a patient. 21 out of 22 nurses got ready to do it. They stopped him, of course, didn't do it. And then they asked him, how many of you have actually done something that you were pretty sure was going to hurt a patient because you didn't want to tell the doctor it was the wrong thing to do? Half of them. Next up is the big one, dehumanization. When we treat another person as though they're not a human, we can do terrible things to them. We see them as essentially being worthless. They're not humans. We can just do unbelievable things. Two white guys were driving a pickup down the road. They saw a black fellow off the side of the road. They stopped, got out, chased him, caught him, wrapped him in chains, tied him to the back end of the pickup, drove off. He didn't just die. He fell into pieces. When they were arrested, the two white guys said, "What's the problem? It's not like we killed a human." I won't use the word. They said that's what they killed. Oh my God. They didn't recognize they killed a human being in a vicious way that was totally unnecessary, completely bizarre. But when we dehumanize, we can do terrible things to people. So how is it good, decent people can morally disengage? One, we say our behavior is honorable. I was doing the good thing. It was justified. The immorality, the seeming immorality, let's say that, the seeming immorality of our behavior justified because it is truly the honorable thing to do. We don't see a link. We deny the link between our behavior and the outcomes that hurt people. We diminish the actual harm that was done. Now get this. We ignore, we distort, we minimize, or disbelieve any negative consequences to the person that came about as a consequence of what we did. And here's one I really find troubling. We blame the victim. They deserved it. Those horrible things that happened to them, well, by golly, they deserved it. We also dehumanize. We do that. Knowing how massively destructive that can be, we treat the person like they're not even a human being. How do we resist these things? Zimbardo gave us great advice. He said, first of all, when you mess up, admit it, and then apologize. Lazare gave us good guidance in his book on apologies. He said, you say, "I'm sorry. Here's why I did what I did. I won't do it again. I'm so very sorry. How can I make it up to you?" Don't get sucked into pseudo-apologies. Pseudo-apologies are things like, well, if anybody out there is upset because of what I did, I'm so very sorry. I'm not sorry what I did. I'm sorry you're upset about it. No, not okay. Use a good quality apology. When it comes to moral issues, don't use automatic thoughts. Some will call this functioning on autopilot. This is where conscious thoughts must be predominant. Next, don't let people de-individuate you. Don't get involved in secret societies or circumstances. You got to keep stuff private. Cards on the table. Be careful anytime that you're being put in a position where you're kind of compelled, maybe, to be anonymous. And then you can de-individuate. You're no longer accountable. Be ready to say, I've changed my mind. Respect just authority. Rebel against unjust authority. Look out for con men, the self-promoters, those people who really you don't want to do what they tell you to do. Don't respect those people. Don't obey those people. Tune into the fact that we really do like to be team players. We say that in the world of business so much. You're not a good team player. Oh, be careful about that. Be sure, in fact, that if we are setting in a set of guidelines for the world of work that dictate how people are to behave, that we're staying within the parameters of good moral behavior before we pull that got to follow the team, because that brings in pressures that you may not like later on. Not to say you don't ever do that, but be careful. If you're going to lose contact with that social support, the folks you turn to give you information, to give you guidance, to give you help, be careful. Cults like that. It's one of the first things they do is to cut you off from those people, and they're therefore better able to manipulate you. Don't go there. Watch how issues are framed. They sometimes can be more influential than the actual arguments themselves. I remember a political fight we had not that long ago over estate taxes. One group called them estate taxes. Taxes that wealthy people pay on their estates. The intent was to minimize the number of financial legacies that we created, or these monolithic family wealth that grows in some circumstances. The group that was opposed to that called it a death tax. We pay taxes all of our life, then we die. They tax us on that, for criminy sakes. Next up, remember, ideologies are just words. If you're going to enact an ideology and it's going to hurt somebody, you want to be very careful. Trust your intuition. The decision science guys, oh my gosh, they're mathematically whiz kids. They work out what is the mathematically appropriate decision to make in the circumstances we're in. Well, they're going to tell you pretty often, after you've done that, do a gut check. There's a famous story told of a CEO of a corporation. Oh my gosh, they worked on a decision for days and days and days and days. Put a tremendous effort into it. Pretty much had the decision in hand. On the way home, he had to pull off the road. He said he was so upset. He got to a point he was pounding on his steering wheel, and he said, "It's wrong. I can't tell you why, but it's not right. It just doesn't feel right." He came back to work the next day and said, "Guys, we got to look at this again. There's something we're missing." And he was right. If it doesn't feel right, if it feels like you're being targeted or somebody's attempting to influence you to do stuff that really is not appropriate, you probably are. Be sure to take responsibility for your own actions. If, in fact, we maintain a sense of personal accountability, we will be much more resistant to those social influences that compel us to do things that are not appropriate. Never accept that you're doing stuff because you're just following orders. That's not okay. If you know it's wrong, it's wrong. I don't care who told you to do it. Oppose unjust systems. Systems can be enormously powerful to resist change. Boy, they're going to stay the way they are. Do it anyway. Resist. Take a good look at rules. If rules are going to compel you to do things that's going to hurt somebody, that's a rule that maybe needs to be changed. Once in a while, there is no choice. Okay, there are tough things in life that happen, but it's also possible that things that happen in life that are tough don't need to. They're being done because of rules, which are really poor rules. They need to be changed. Next thing. Go to lucifereffect.com. Check it out, Philip Zimbardo's work. He's quite impressive. Let's bring this all to conclusion. As ethical beings, we may work to enhance our moral reasoning, to strengthen our faith, and follow the universal principles. It's not enough. We need to be vigilant to subtle social psychological influences that quietly compel us to behave in a manner that's going to get somebody hurt. Philip Zimbardo said, evil is knowing something is going to hurt somebody and doing it anyway. We need to eliminate these influences that compel us to do evil. If we do so, far fewer people get hurt. Becoming a good, decent person is hard. There's no doubt about that. We also need to overcome influences that need us to harm other people. We need to do both things. Become a good person and at the same time, reduce the risk we're going to hurt other people. Okay, to do what Zimbardo would call evil. Concludes our topic. Thank you.